Okay, thank you all for the big crowd behind the screen, and thank you all for tuning in online. I'm Lisa Young. I'm Access Services Director for Library Services, and welcome to our final Faculty Read series of the school year. In this informal yet thoughtful series, we invite faculty to choose a few books that have influenced their career path or their life story, or simply inspired them in some way, and give a brief talk about them. They have the creative freedom to interpret that invitation as they see fit. With each installment of the series, I personally have learned something new about each professor, or their passion, or their research, and my hope is that that will be the collective experience here. With that being said, we are featuring two cinema art professors today, Andrew Malines and Ben Scholey. As for introductions, it's a bit of a faculty read series tradition to read reviews from the peer-reviewed source, ratemyprofessor.com.
Wow.
So let's...
Please read one of the first two. Right. That's my only request. Because my first two are scorching.
Scorching.
Yes.
Okay, here's one that I picked. Andrew is thebomb.com.
That's the nice one.
No matter what, if I see his name on a class, I immediately will take it. He is knowledgeable, kind, and hilarious. He has definitely made me a better writer. He is always there if you need help and is easily the best professor I've ever had. Now for Ben Scholey.
Oh, that was somebody at a different institution.
No, it was here actually. It was here.
Okay, his review. Legend, wait for it, dairy. That is the entire review. Perhaps.
So I get bomb.com and he gets, like, we're both mean
That's right.
professors.
That's right, that's right. So perhaps enough said there, but I will read another review for good measure. Ben Scholey is brilliant. He is honestly my favorite teacher ever. He makes going to class and learning fun. I've learned more in his class than in all of my others combined. Okay,
That
without...
probably predates your arrival here.
I think my contemporary one was saying other things.
Okay, so without further ado, I give you bomb.com, Andrew Malines, and legendary Ben Scholey.
Totally yours.
Okay.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to see all of you here. So many familiar faces, and I appreciate you taking your Tuesday afternoon to be with us or to be live streaming us. So I guess, should I just talk about why I chose the book? Is that a good starting?
So when you were hit with this question of what books influenced your life or your research, how did you pick this book?
So I was worried that you would follow up the invitation with a question about what book I would choose. Like I didn't actively anticipate that. I just waited until the request came, and then I realized I had to pick something. So I think Andrew and I had very different approaches to this. I just thought back through, books I've read that somehow changed me or had some sort of an impact on my life. And there were others, but I think that this was probably the first one that really changed my worldview, even though I was like 15 years old, I got to the Autobiography of Malcolm X the way most people do, which is through watching Do the Right Thing when I was a freshman in high school.
Yeah.
And I just remember, that movie obviously kind of makes a point of the two different poles that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King represented, and the way that their legacy sort of echoes in 1989, and obviously still, because that movie's probably even more relevant now than it was when it was made. And so I guess I sort of felt like I was just intrigued. Like I felt like, oh, Malcolm X, I've always sort of understood him to be this kind of like, he was like the dangerous civil rights leader. He was like the one who, people were like, well, he believed in separation, and he, was hateful, and like all these sort of negatives. And I guess guess I sort of wanted to find out, who he was, and so the autobiography was kind of the obvious choice. I think I want to say it was recommended somewhere. It's probably on some reading list. You know what I mean? That I had. So I just thought it was really interesting at that point because it did sort of give me insight into this whole sort of other side and this other person who I knew existed but didn't know anything about, and I think it did feel sort of I guess a little bit like sort of the dangerous other side of the civil rights movement. But then as you get through it, and this is why it's relevant to me now. So the reason I would come back to this book is because it reads like such a story. There's a narrative in this, and it actually concludes with him completely changing his views about almost everything. So he goes through this remarkable character arc where he starts off as like a small-time gangster in Detroit, and then goes to jail, and then comes out of jail, and he is sort of adopted by the Nation of Islam and becomes their charismatic spokesperson, and really is like a kind of a fiery figure who's chosen to go on like talk shows and interview shows and gets a lot of press just because it's almost like he symbolizes for the mainstream what they're scared of, and he also then makes the more mainstream civil rights movement seem like the safe choice, right? So that's who he is. And then in the last 2 years of his life, after he starts the autobiography, he breaks with the Nation of Islam, embraces inclusiveness, and really has a completely different message and becomes a completely different person. And then he's killed, very, very shortly. So within 2 years, so he I think starts writing this in 1963, and then finishes, or I should say dies in 1965, and the book is published in 65. And he even said he didn't expect to see it published. He did not expect to live long enough to see the book. So that to me is also interesting because as a storyteller, we think about character arcs and we think about the way that stories go, and it's kind of strange, really, that for all of the sort of transgressiveness, of what Malcolm X stood for and the ways that I think it scared people in the mainstream, I also think that then at the end he became safe. He sort of emerged in the end, and it's like this satisfying arc for people reading it to think oh good, he came around and saw things the way we wanted him to. You know what I mean? And it's sort of a strange way to finish a very, very long story with just these last 2 years of his life, but everyone looks at it as sort of like the redemptive ending that you'd expect from a movie. So that's number 2, right? So I think if I came back to this in my 20s as I was learning filmmaking, that's where I would go with it. And then more recently, as I've been doing documentary, I think what's really interesting about this book is the way that that we sort of have to consider authorship, right? We have to think about the fact that it's the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley. So it's as told to Alex Haley. In some cases, it's considered a collaboration. We really don't know how much he did. I mean, we understand that the words are Malcolm X's and that Malcolm X had approval over the book, but we also have to understand that there was a writer who was helping him shape the story. And there, Haley documents, points where he said, no, you can't go back and change that. You said that a year ago, and you need to stick with it. And he said, if you go back and edit the stuff, from that you're writing about 10 years ago, then the reader isn't going to go on the same journey that you did, and and the story won't be as good. You're ruining the ending, is what he said. He said, okay, you've changed now, but we have to save that for the end. Let the middle be the middle, which is, good storytelling. It's also, in some ways, manipulative, but I think it's an interesting. It's that idea of a give and take, right? Like, who's best suited to tell your story? Is it yourself, or do we all edit our stories to look like our Facebook posts? You know what I mean? Or is it better to have somebody to bounce it back and forth between, so that you have, a more, I don't know, like a balance, some kind of like a check to your impulses, where you might try to make yourself more flattering. So to me, that's also interesting. There's the idea of representation and whose book this is, and how truthful it is to the person, and what it means to take somebody's story or take somebody's life and try to make it into a story. And is that really something that, are we forcing things onto a story or onto a life in order to make it more digestible? So that's kind of where I am with it now. I think of it more in terms of like documentary ethics, which is something I teach a lot. And now I'm going to hand this off to Andrew. I could talk more about it, but here you go.
I feel like I'm hosting.
Okay.
I will say, just to follow up a little bit on what you're saying, I grew up in the South, so our sort of history of the civil rights movement, I think, is probably even more censored than maybe even you got, in the sense of the rough edges of the civil rights movement are sort of excised, and I think this is representative of that, right? I mean, it's like, so when you're confronted with this, it's like, oh, I thought it was just like civil rights movement was like one thing, and so, like I said, the South's sort of educational history with those topics is a little sketchy. I did something completely different. I don't think my books are as meaningful. And we've been going back and forth a little bit over. Once I saw his book selection, I was like, oh, man.
Like if I would have picked like the books that I teach, I'd have to actually read them again.
I got to be honest with you. I think I went through the same thing, which was like, sure, I'd love to be a part of this, and then I thought there would be a gap of like I would be able to sort of wait for a month to think of something. I have to admit, like for me, when I look back, like there are books that were meaningful to me. All the King's Men resonated. Oedipus Rex I always loved. But movies, I mean, I hate to sound like the product of the late 20th century, but Star Wars had more of an impact on me than like every other piece of literature combined. Like I can't even sort of begin. So I had these movies that periodically would sort of pop up, and I think really sort of resonated from Star Wars, obviously, as a kid, to Henry V when I was in college is when I was like, I would like to do that, of all movies, I think, to sort of resonate. So I just sort of took the assignment, if you will, and sort of thought of the books that sort of shape what I teach, and that stick in my head in terms of a paradigm of what I teach. Because there's a lot of books, I think, particularly because I mainly teach screenwriting, and there's a lot of books about screenwriting because it's very obvious that every time a writer doesn't have a script to write, they write a book. So there's, I mean, like every year there's like 3 or 4 screenwriting books with different sort of angles to them. The one, I picked Story, which is not here. Story, which is as big as that one. It would have been, I think it would have rivaled. Story by Robert McKee, which came out while I was in grad school. I think there had not been a lot of screenwriting books for a long time. Like Linda Sager's book was out there, Sid Field's book was out there, but I think there wasn't a perceived market for filmmaking books like there is now. So in my mind's eye, there hadn't been a lot of books. I mean, even back when I was in grad school, there's only cinematography by Chris Malkowitz, which is a terrible book in a lot of ways. But I knew somebody that actually had him as a professor. So Robert McKee's Story came out. My screenwriting professor in grad school was just in love with this. I remember I picked it up and was like, okay, like it became very obvious that Robert McKee had not seen a movie in 20 years that he liked. It really was very obvious that if movies stopped being made after Chinatown, he would have been completely fine with it. Like he would have just ridden off into the sunset. So I remember the first time I read it being like, yeah, okay, like this is pretty compelling. I found myself as a student not fully understanding, like for me, there were certain things as sort of a beginning writer that I just didn't get. I had a hard time identifying act structure. I had a hard time sort of turning, and I think this is true for every student when they first start, which is I've seen so many movies in my life, but I don't know how to interpret them and turn them back around. And I found that Robert McKee was really dependent, I think, on the reader of understanding those things. So I was like, okay, like we all read it. We all kind of, to our professor, were like, yeah, this is, oh wow, like Story, like this is amazing. And kind of put it on the shelf for a while. And then when I started teaching, I sort of came back to it. It started to resonate a lot more. I started to appreciate what he was trying to do in terms of tapping into this idea that it's not about the Sid Field paradigm of all Hollywood movies are a certain thing. It is about tapping into story and sort of long-standing traditions of story and sort of the mystical idea of what it takes to create something, while at the same time bearing in mind that writing is hard. So the first half of that book is golden. The second half of that book is just sort of hard. It's like Robert McKee had a page count they had to get up to. So the first half is golden. If you see Chinatown, it's golden. And it really spoke to me, but it felt sort of esoteric. It felt kind of hard to then how to inspire, how to turn that into something. So then I read Save the Cat, which is kind of the polar opposite. And I loved as I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is so different than Robert McKee. Like I was so enraptured, and there's a very provocative moment in that book where he basically completely trashes Memento. Where he's like, everyone loves Memento. How much money did Memento make? And I was like, man, like I really like Memento, but I respect the fact that the author of Blank Check is writing a book where he's basically like, 5 people saw that movie, everyone thinks it's great, but at the end of the day, only 5 people saw that movie, so how does it really resonate? And I was like, oh, this is like a different worldview. And then he goes into sort of laborious process in terms of his beat sheet, and everything that goes along with that. And for me, it just sort of sat on another side of my brain. It was like, okay, this is a very different way of looking at it. You know, you read the sort of curmudgeon that Robert McKee is, and then you read this guy who's full of energy, and he's very vocal, and he's like, lots of movies are made this way, this is a way to make them, this is a way to sell your movie. And so for me, the danger was that, like, I will be honest with you, I went to a conference once, and someone was talking about about Save the Cat, and this guy sitting next to me was like, that book is BS. Like, I would never teach that book. And I was like, really? Like I actually thought it was kind of good. Then he got up and presented his book, which I thought was just nonsense, so we're not going to talk about that one. But it was one of those things where it's like, I can't imagine teaching one of them as a devoted text. But the idea of saying, look, here are 2 books that sort of tap into different things of what it means to be a writer for film and television, and sort of take them for what they will. I'll be honest with you, it was really amazing after I read Save the Cat, and I was like, wow, this guy, and I Googled him, and he was dead. Like, it was this weird moment of just like feeling this guy had this sort of real vivacity in what he was doing, and real sort of passion, and discovered that by the time I read that book, which was only, I think like a couple years after it was published, he'd already passed away. And so it's just like, I found myself thinking, well, I guess maybe that book meant something. In a way, or at least it's sort of the tone of voice of the author meant something. The third book, which I think is a little different, is Directing Actors by Judith Weston. I kind of love that book because I feel, and one thing I talk about with my students is sort of this triangle between directing, acting, and writing. That to write is to both direct and act your story and to act your movie. And she does, I think, a really remarkable job of expressing acting, and most particularly expressing what it takes to work with and engage an actor in a meaningful creative pursuit. And I think if somebody digests, particularly what she talks about with active verbs, I think if someone reads that and digests it, and then when they sit down to write, has the idea of working with beats and giving playable action and sort of all the things that go along with her book, I think it just broadens the scope of what a writer does. So that, it's for me, it was not that any one of those books was necessarily revelatory, but I feel like they just, fill up sort of space in when I teach, in terms of expressing how to approach subject matter, how to work through subject matter, how to broaden what you write. So for me, that's sort of the direction I went. And I think said what movie? We were talking about Star Wars.
Totally different.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the question I'm going to ask, is both of you have said movies. So you said you were kind of inspired to read this book because of a movie. So I guess that would be the question I have for you, is because of your profession, your background, you said Star Wars. Could you explain why? In what movie would you say is the movie that inspires you? Okay. You could think about it.
I'll go first. I can talk about Star Wars.
I'll think for a second.
Is there a more meaningful movie than Star Wars? I haven't discovered it.
I was just gonna say I have never seen a Star Wars movie, and I would love to hear the impact that it's had on you as a blind Star Wars person.
Look, I think everyone takes the things that they see that are meaningful and sort of feels like they're unique, like they were the audience. I will say unequivocally, I was the audience. I was 7 years old. Like that was so 7 years old through. I remember sitting out in front of my house in California, watering the lawn because that's what you did back then, and reading the novelization of The Empire Strikes Back before it came out, and literally getting to the moment where he says, "I'm your father," and I was like, "What?" I was like, "What?" I just couldn't cope. So it was everything. Like, and I try to explain it to the students because I break down. I use the Judith Weston stuff, and I break down a scene based on what she does, and I say, I'm now going to show you the most important scene in movie history, and they think I'm going to show blah Rosebud, right? Like something like that. And I show the Luke, I am your father scene, and I was like, this is it. Like this is, in a lot of ways, I think, particularly in film and television now, the most important scene. The references to Star Wars, the meaning of Star Wars for people my age and younger that are now working in film and television. Like, it resonated in a way with so little media. This movie was in theaters, like you remember, like Star Wars was in movie theaters constantly for 6 years. Like coming back for Christmas would be, and it would come out. So it was just everything: the toys, the books, the movies. Looking back on it now, like there's some cheesy moments that I adore. Like, Luke is going to he wanted to go to Tashi Station, but he doesn't get to. So it is sort of everything wrapped up into one in terms of the mythology, the story, the character, the ancillary stuff, the way it dominated media, the way it dominated like my interactions with people playing with toys, reading Mad magazine. Like it was just sort of everything. It's hard to get away from that. So when a student comes to me and says they never watched it, I cry a little inside.
But where does one start? That's a follow-up.
Oh, Star Wars.
Just so like go.
Yeah, Star Wars. And we're not doing an episode. We're not doing it's Star
okay.
Wars. It's not A New Hope. Like let's not. Yeah, no.
Because it was called that originally.
And what's weird now is I think Star Wars used to be a very pure expression in a lot of ways. Like there was Star Trek, which was for the geeks and people who cared about that kind of stuff. Star Wars, I think, always from the very beginning. Now it's morphed a lot. Now I think the rabid fan base, the sort of hateful rhetoric that comes, is looking back on it now. I just don't remember that. That just wasn't a thing.
So first of all, I think if you haven't seen those films, if you're an adult who hasn't been exposed to any of them, there's got to be some value in that you can leverage. Like I would think there's a study you could participate in, because you're it's a rare experience.
Obviously grew up in a bunker. Or
Right. Yeah. So somewhere somehow they can like watch your reaction as you're seeing it for the first time. So yeah, hold on to that until you can somehow like get paid or something. I wish we would have had this conversation before we picked our books, because I read the novelization of Return of the Jedi before that film came out, and if we had come in here and had on the little X here the novelization of Empire Strikes Back and the novelization of Return of the Jedi, written by
Alan D. Foster.
Oh, wow, you really.
I'm pretty sure it's Alan D. Foster if I'm correct. I think.
Okay, you're legitimate.
I don't know.
That word now.
Yeah. Look that up.
So I do remember reading that, and what an awful way to ruin a film, really. Like, just a terrible, terrible mistake. So I remember that. I mean, like those films were a big part of my experience growing up. I mentioned Do the Right Thing. That was kind of, for me, that was a film that, for whatever reason, made me think that like maybe making films was within reach for me, or maybe like this was something that I really would want to do. But then I don't know. There have been so many. You know what I mean? I think like we, in the same way that somebody teaching literature just can't wait to share certain books with their students, like we also can't wait to share certain films with our students. I showed a film in this room yesterday afternoon called Rat Film, which is a documentary that I saw a couple of years ago at a festival. And when I saw it, I said, I have to show this to my students. I think they might hate it, but I have to show it to them just so we can have the conversation about it. And we did, and they they didn't hate it. One student said, partway through the discussion, he said, "Am I the only person in the room who wasn't made angry by this movie?" And everyone else said, "No, you're misreading it. We were all annoyed by the movie." I was like, "Who said that?" So even that's a rewarding experience. But I think I would say, like I always come back to The Graduate and Dr. Strangelove as like movies that really sort of shaped my sense of humor and my aesthetic in terms of like the stuff that I wrote and produced later on when I was doing fiction stuff in grad school. But I think a film that I saw early on when I was early on in studying film and that has stuck with me and that I still show is The Thin Blue Line, which is one of Errol Morris's earlier documentaries, and it stuck with me because of the fact that it is a documentary, but it's not necessarily, I guess it's a whodunit, like it's a mystery, it's a documentary about a completed case, and yet it's going back and it's reinvestigating, and we've seen it done so many times. I mean, it's been done to death, and this kind of thing is a cliche now, and even that film has some stuff that's like, so when Documentary Now did the parody of it, they didn't really have to change anything. like it's sort of almost, to watch it now, it almost parodies itself. But it was a film that sort of opened my, I'd seen documentaries. I'd even said when I was in high school, boy, I think we could make documentaries someday, without really knowing what that meant. But then that film changed my thoughts about what a documentary could be and how you could tell a nonfiction story.
And so Ben, you had mentioned that when you were in graduate school, you were doing fiction, and now it seems like you do more documentaries. Can you talk a little bit about that sway?
Yeah, I think so. So we went to very different grad programs. I actually went to a program that has like a fairly strong documentary focus, but the pull of doing fiction film was there. Like everybody worked on each other's films. It was almost like doing a documentary there wasn't even an option. And I also kind of said to myself that I knew that I could do documentaries later on a smaller scale, without having to have like access to a lot of equipment and crew and just all the resources that a school provided. And so I felt like if I was ever going to make fiction films, that was the time to do it. And so I don't know if I had no idea where I was going to go after that. But I felt like that's what I was really interested in doing.
I have some more questions, but I was going to let others.
So Ben, how do you choose what films you get to play here in the theater for your series? Like what goes into it, or what restrictions do you have? Or?
That's me, actually.
Oh, sorry.
Money is part of it, which is changing the dynamic a little bit. I try to touch base with the students with mixed results in terms of what they would kind of want to see. Usually my goal is I show the current stuff because it brings people in. I do try to choose current stuff that I think is worth watching, and that becomes me. It becomes why is Black Panther more worthy than Aquaman? On one level, I don't think that's a question that needs to be asked. On the other hand, it's a factor, right? It's a factor, meaning I showed Wonder Woman, sort of Black Panther, sort of mainstream films like that I think have a quality to them while not sort of pandering to some degree. The older stuff is sometimes it's just a really conscious effort to say I have like I guess it's just how I operate, but I put the things down and I put the years down, and then I have a little graph that shows me like what I'm showing the most from. And there are moments where I say like I've got to find something from the 50s that hasn't shown. Or look, sometimes it's just I showed Mishima earlier in this semester for I think a person. I think that movie is brilliant. Like it is beautiful and thought provoking and just amazing. And so I was like, I'm going to show this movie. So yeah, I wish that there was more method to it, other than just trying to show stuff that works, trying to link some stuff together where at all possible, trying to create some threads. Sometimes it's purely just what can I maybe show that will attract an audience from like. Ben has his documentary course this semester, so it's like, okay, let me program some stuff that will fit into that. that has mixed results. So, yeah.
Well, you still have the microphone. Which Henry V? I'm assuming Laurence Olivier.
Oh no, I gotta be honest with you, it's Kenneth Branagh's. Because the man has, I mean, he just has no. I admired his beard and his lips so much as that movie went along. Because Kenneth Branagh is like, no, like it's like just like I was never a Shakespeare guy. Like I have to admit, I'm not a Shakespeare guy. And I think afterwards I went back and sort of discovered Olivier's Hamlet and things like that. But just Branagh's Henry V, like I was just captivated by it. The music is Patrick Doyle, and I thought it was just brilliant. And I just sat in that movie theater and was just like, oh, the speech, right? The whole Agincourt speech, just wow, just tingly all over. So and look, sometimes I think you go see a movie and you just become invested on who's on screen. Like I think even if you think it's a great movie, deep down, then I was like, I'm rooting for Kenneth Branagh now. Like I'll go see Dead Again. I'll go see Dead Again 3 times. Because and then I was disappointed when he had an affair because I thought he and Thompson were so good together. So yeah, it just was magical, and it's one of those things where there are movies that, like Ben mentioned, that stick with me that I show my students that I'm like, this is a great movie. I want you to see Fargo, like see this movie, and Monsoon Wedding, which I will show in any context I can. Henry V is just one of those things I look back and go, I'm not sure why this movie resonated. I'm not a Shakespeare guy. It's not necessarily the movie, but it just is at that time, it just resonated. I had some friends that were French that were annoying me, so maybe that was why. I don't know.
So I do have, I work exactly at the same times that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so I never get to come up, but I do try to get my student employees, especially when I see some of the movies that have resonated with me, like The Double Life of Veronique and then Mulholland Drive stuff. I'm like, you guys need to go see this. So
Trainspotting is tonight, and I gotta be honest, that was another movie that I worked at a movie theater and people were coming to see Trainspotting, and it's like, whoa, yeah, Trainspotting, like it was the hip movie. And I went to go see it, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, now I know why all the hipsters were showing up for it. So, I mean, everything's different. And I've had no real reason to show Trainspotting in class, but God, I love that movie. Just unreservedly. Probably just because of when I saw it and where I saw it.
So I do have a question for both people to answer, and then I have a question, I guess, for Ben. But if you could teach one class that would be your dream class, what would be the title? Like that you haven't been able to teach yet, or if there is one that you have taught.
So I think we have that luxury. Like like it's not if you could. It's like which of the classes that you've created is your dream class. I don't know. I mean, I teach so many classes that I love. So the documentary class that I teach every 2 years, I'm teaching right now, and I love teaching it. Although I'm feeling at this point in the semester that the students are a little bit beaten down by the frequency of production that they have to do. So I may change that in the future. But I've been very stubborn about like keeping that the way it's been. I don't know. I mean, I love teaching history of film, and that's just like that's a course that we've got a description for, in the catalog, but we can do whatever we want with it. I mean, there's so much latitude to shape that course. Like, there's a text, but I mean, text has everything. I love teaching the intro class, like the freshman level intro to cinema arts, which is like, what does it mean to see value in a film, and how do you tell a story? I love teaching that. So I'd hate to have to pick just one, but I enjoy teaching documentary because that's where I feel like I'm really, really confident that I can field any question that comes up, and I feel like we get to explore issues about what does it really mean to claim that you're putting reality on a screen, and what responsibility or what ethical codes go along with being able to make that claim. And I think that's an important thing that actually even transfers to fiction, because in a lot of cases people are telling stories that may be scripted, but they're still claiming to have basis in reality.
Two sort of different things. One, I taught them a micro cinema course in here last year that was the students making 10 very short films, either individually as a group, and that was amazing because I didn't have to teach anything. because they were coming in every week with films for us to watch. So that was amazing, just to be in a class and it just be nothing but going through creative work, some of which resonated, some of which wasn't good, you know, because they're the turnaround so fast. So that was sort of great to be able to sit and watch and talk and be a part. And I think going through that many productions built a camaraderie amongst those students that to some degree I think still exists. The other class, and I haven't taught it here yet for a variety of reasons, I taught a history of animation course that from a selfish point of view, just every week to be, I hope you guys get something out of this. Man, I'm going to get so much out of the next 2 hours because I'm going to show, you know, like I did a double feature of Coraline and Spirited Away, which I loved because I felt like I hope the students got something out of it because I sure did. So that from a selfish point of view of a subject matter that I feel I've spent years just sort of studying and know that just, and look, to echo what Ben said, I think I'm very fortunate to be able to teach courses that literally I'm never disappointed or never depressed to be teaching. I've never had to teach a course here that I dreaded or that I kind of didn't necessarily want to teach. But those are the two that I think have just, you know, both for professional and personal reasons, just to be able to screen stuff that I unreservedly love. I think that's the animation definitely in that one.
Do you
Are we
have
going to pick
another
our
one?
students?
I did have one more for Ben, but I didn't want to usurp things
No,
too
you're
much.
good.
But, so, for documentaries that come to your head right now, like what do you recommend? Like what's your what's come out as astounding to you that's been on your mind lately?
So I was just about to say, I highly recommend Bisbee 17, which will be showing here on Wednesday, April 24th, because we're bringing the filmmaker Robert Greene in from Columbia, Missouri, to talk about the film, and I think it's a fascinating hybrid of documentary and fiction-ish or scripted filmmaking. It's sort of like there's this whole like documentary subgenre of like the making, it's like the reenacting of it's the behind the scenes of the reenactment of the event. So there's been a lot of this for whatever reason, but this is the first film I think that really did it well and with purpose, and so I really would like to see people come to that. It's going to be here at 8 o'clock on so it's a film series, but it's on a Wednesday night. So so we scheduled it specifically so you could be here, Chris.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll work it out for sure.
So let's see what else. I love Exit Through the Gift Shop. I don't even know if it's a documentary. It might be a hoax, but I love that film. Oh no! So that's the interesting thing. Sometimes the worst films are the ones that really stick with you the most. I go to the True False Film Festival every year, and I saw this film called The Caniba, which I don't even know if I really feel comfortable describing it if I'm like on Facebook Live. It was
Facebook would let you get away with a lot of stuff.
It was horrendous. It was very. So at the beginning of the screening, the director got up in front. So the director's there from England to present the film, and he says, thank you for coming. This is a very challenging film. If you don't make it to the end, we'll understand. In fact, our producer has never seen it all the way through. Refuses to watch it all for whatever reason. So I took that as a challenge. I was like, really? You don't think I can make it to the end of the movie? Well, we'll see about that. And what an awful use of 2 hours that was. It was disturbing and like almost unwatchable. But we do talk about it a lot.
I enjoy hearing about
and
it.
when I played at the Webster Film Series, my colleague Peter Carlos said, "Oh my gosh, this film you were talking about, it's playing at Webster. I need to go see it." I said, "No, did you not hear me? Don't go see it." He's like, "Well, now I have to." So there is, I guess, some like again, like even the film that I showed yesterday in here, I don't really know if it's good, but it's really interesting and really worthy of discussion, and you can learn a lot. And that's what I said to my students. It's closer to experimental than any other documentary you've seen, and I just want it to be sort of one more thing that you can think about as you're producing your own film. Just one more, idea of directions you can go, or even if you only incorporate little elements or pieces or whatever.
Got a question for both of you. So as filmmakers, how do you watch films or documentaries as filmmakers, and what do you look for?
Go. Okay. All right. So I think when I always tell students in like the intro class that there's a good chance that studying film will ruin film enjoyment for them, and I think that's only half true. I think you can obviously, you can say that you'd enjoy it from a different level, but I think it's like learning music. Do you know how, I remember having friends who were like learning how to play guitar, and suddenly the music they were listening to wasn't like catchy or like enjoyable at all for me. It was like intricate and complicated, and I was like, you're appreciating it for the musicianship, but what about like the actual entertainment value of the music, So I will say, I feel like I can turn that on or turn it off. You know what I mean? Like, I think I can go to some movies and just say, I am here to enjoy and to escape, and then if the film is good enough to sustain that, great. If it's not, then I'll start thinking about the lighting,
Yeah.
And then in other cases, I feel like I'm there to study, and I'm not sure what it is that motivates that one way or the other.
I agree with the idea that students, when you tell them to watch something, they always act like, oh man, like then I'm not going to enjoy it. I can't turn it off, meaning that even if I'm watching something that's meant to be escapist, I'm still looking at the wires, so to speak. But I will say that it never lessens my enjoyment for a movie. Like, I don't, even if at the end now I will say occasionally, if I feel a movie is not well done, I think the only difference is theoretically I can put my finger on why I don't think it's well done. Mm-hmm. Meaning that if I went to go see It, and I literally was like, this movie is never going to leave the first act. Like, I was like, when is this going to leave the first act? And so for me it was, I didn't like the way it was playing out, and I think if nothing else I was just able to sort of say in a quote-unquote professional way what I thought was wrong with it. But I would argue that my appreciation or my looking at the way it is made sort of accentuates my enjoyment of it equally as sort of making me question why a movie was made or whether it was worth it. If I enjoy a movie, I enjoy a movie. Like, I mean, there's no, there's no difference between that. I've seen so many movies with my kid, and we go to see them purely just because he enjoys certain movies. So that's never been an issue.
Has your child ever kind of swayed your thinking, right? Because you
No.
kind of.
I don't know if Ben's going to echo this. I'm pretty steadfast, and I think my child should be a reflection of my opinions in large part. No, I will say that occasionally he will watch something, and he watches just garbage. He watches, it's a curse, because probably I grew up, even though I taught a history of animation course, just anime, just did not like it, did not enjoy it. Akira was brilliant because I'm supposed to like that. The Studio Ghibli films, obviously. But he started watching stuff like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which to me, I can't even... So if nothing else, he's exposed me to things that I dislike that I would normally come into contact with. There are things that because he enjoys them, I may not start liking, but I might start enjoying the fact that he likes them. Meaning that I will get enthusiastic about things that he's interested in, not because I like it, but because I am willing to endorse and support his level of interest in esoteric and unusual sort of things like that. But no, he's never swayed my opinion on by any means.
Am I answering the question about watching films with my kids? Is that so?
That sounds great.
Hey, you have opening night tickets to?
Yeah, so I will say that like my kids, I would not watch like Marvel movies if it weren't for my my children, and I enjoy going to those because they enjoy them, and I think, you know, and those are actually, that's an example of films that I do not try to deconstruct them while I'm watching them. I just watch them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just let it happen. Now, I also think there's very little that's as disappointing as watching a film that you love with your kids and then finding out that they're just not at all into it. And to the point where it'll even kind of like take some of the shine off the film for me, you know. And I've done that. I mean, you know, like in classes too. I've like put films into courses, and like, oh my gosh, they're gonna love this. It's gonna be great. And like something just completely falls flat, and I think, okay, well, first of all, I'm never showing that again, and second of all, is it bad? Like, is this just my like strange taste? But yeah, I've definitely watched films with my kids that I was like, oh, I love this when I was your age. It was the best movie. It's hilarious. And we watch it, and I'm, you know how it is. Like the same as when we watch films with our students. You're watching their reaction as much as you are like watching the film. And sometimes it's like you're thinking, should I start laughing so that they know that they're supposed to laugh here? Like, should I be sort of like the laugh track? Yeah. So I don't know. But I think that probably says a lot about how quickly trends can change. And I think comedy in particular changes so fast, you know, because a lot of comedy is about pushing boundaries, and I think where you're watching boundaries that were pushed in the 1980s, you know, like a lot of that stuff's been done and overdone, and it just doesn't hold up like it used to.
I'm fortunate that I only have one in that sense. Like meaning my kid in a lot of ways, to be honest, compartmentalized like what he picked up from either of his parents, and so Marvel movies, like all that kind of stuff, like he has co-opted my taste. He has 3 kids, so clearly, you know, I imagine if I had another one that would probably roll their eyes at the stuff that me and my kid like. So I've always been very fortunate that my kid, in large part, has glommed on to sort of my taste of things, because I was the one that was feeding him all this stuff. Like it was, hey, we're gonna go watch this.
Yeah.
So I've been fortunate in that regard.
Well, I think there's also you have to be patient. You have to like you have to let the kids come to the films rather than like forcing the films on the kids.
No, force feeding.
That's what, because it's like, you're gonna love this. Sit down, watch it, and then they're like, can we get up and leave? Like that, and well, then it's compulsory, and then no one's gonna enjoy that, you know.
I took my kid to go see the 3D version of the Phantom Menace, which I hate, even though it's a Star Wars movie. And so the flip side happened where he was like, "This is okay." I was like, "Really? Like you like this?" like I'm falling asleep for part of it, and like afterwards, even today, he'll be like, "It's okay, like it's all right." I was like, "No, it's still, what is wrong?" So sometimes it backfires. Like you sort of see something, and now he's obsessed with memes. So now he enjoys quoting prequel quotes to me. I think just to harass me.
Which you don't recognize.
Totally no, I recognize them now. Like that's the problem. Be like, that's Palpatine, right? He'd be like, so, yeah.
All right, any more questions? Good? All right.
Well, it was really nice of you all to be here, and I'm actually kind of glad that the students most likely to heckle didn't.
Yes, no, I had in my mind's eye the ones that I wouldn't want to.
Well, thank you both for your fantastic talks and introducing us to just various films and various ways to experience films, in my opinion, different content to experience. So thank you all for being here and tuning in online.